Her hands smelled of pine sol and lies. When the ghost light flickered red, she didn't scream. She locked her boss in steel and grabbed a floor scraper instead of a gun. The scent of expensive pine sol mixed with cold iron. That was my world. Every surface in Chairman Ji-Hoon's penthouse had to gleam like black glass, every corner purged of dust, every breath I took measured and silent. Invisible. That's what good help was supposed to be. I was halfway through the floor-to-ceiling windows on the 43rd floor when I saw it. The ghost light. A thin red flicker embedded in the crown molding near the marble entryway. Most people wouldn't notice it. Most people weren't trained to. My hand stilled on the microfiber cloth. The chemical clean smell of the glass cleaner suddenly felt too sharp, too aware. The ghost light only activated when the perimeter was breached. Someone was inside the building. Someone who shouldn't be. I didn't drop my spray bottle. I didn't flinch. Behind me, Chairman Ji-Hoon sat at his obsidian desk, fingers dancing across a tablet, brokering deals that could topple governments or birth new ones. The King of the Silent Sea, they called him in the underground circles of Seoul. Untouchable. Unreachable. A god among shadows. He wore a charcoal suit tailored so precisely it looked like it had been painted onto his frame. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, his eyes darker than the polished desk he leaned over. Everything about him screamed power, control, permanence. But I saw what others missed. The slight tremor in his left hand when he thought no one was looking. The way he checked the corridor cameras every 11 minutes, like clockwork. The faint scar along his collarbone, barely visible above his collar, that he claimed was from a childhood fall but was really from a blade meant for his throat 3 years ago. Ji-Hoon wasn't invincible. He was just very, very good at pretending. "Chairman," I said softly, my voice carrying the rhythmic, submissive lilt I'd perfected over 18 months. "Your 2 o'clock called. They'll be 15 minutes late." He didn't look up. Acceptable. That's how our conversations went. Transactional. Efficient. He knew my name, at least, the name on my employment contract, but he rarely used it. I was the attendant, you, or sometimes just a gesture toward the coffee station. I moved through his space like water, filling gaps, erasing evidence of living. I knew where he kept his backup phones, 3 locations, rotated weekly. I knew his coffee order by heart, 2 sugars, no cream, precisely 82 degrees Celsius. I knew the exact rhythm of his breathing when he slept in his office chair after 72-hour negotiation marathons. What he didn't know was that I also knew how to disassemble a Glock 19 in 14 seconds. That my cleaning cart had a false bottom. That the smiling, soft-spoken black woman who polished his floors had been hand-picked by his head of security, now 6 feet under in an unmarked grave, as the final failsafe. The one person allowed in his inner sanctum when everyone else was locked out. I caught my reflection in the window's glass, dark skin, braids pulled tight into a professional bun, uniform pressed into submission. I looked harmless. Forgettable. Perfect. The ghost light flickered again. Then the digital scrambler on Ji-Hoon's desk emitted a soft, dying whine. His head snapped up. The color drained from his face faster than I'd ever seen. "Comms are down," he said, his voice low and sharp. His hand moved toward the holster hidden beneath his desk, but his fingers were stiff, hesitant. He wasn't used to being the one under threat. "Security. They're already dead, sir." My voice lost its lilt. The words came out flat, factual, stripped of the performance I'd worn like a second skin for 18 months. His eyes locked onto mine. For the first time since I'd started working here, Chairman Ji-Hoon truly saw me. Not as furniture. Not as help. As something unknown and therefore dangerous. Confusion warred with a new, sharp fear across his face. I set down the spray bottle with deliberate care and crossed the room in 4 strides. My fingers wrapped around his arm, dense, heavy muscle beneath expensive fabric, and I hauled him toward the western wall. The obsidian panel that everyone assumed was decorative. "What are you?" "Move. Now." He didn't resist, but his body was tense, coiled. He was calculating, trying to understand the shift, the variables that had just rewritten his reality. I reached the panel and entered the override code. 4 digits no one except the now dead head of security and I should have known. Star. 0. 9. Star. The wall hissed, pneumatic seals releasing with a sound like a dying breath. The panic room, reinforced steel, independent oxygen supply, enough rations for 2 weeks, yawned open like a mouth. I shoved him inside. His eyes were wide, locked onto mine as the steel door began its automated slide. He reached out, hand extended toward me, a silent plea written in the tension of his fingers. "Come with me, don't stay out there." I simply shook my head and slammed my palm against the manual lock override. The door sealed with a final, definitive clang. I leaned close to the gap that remained, barely an inch of space, and whispered, "The cameras still work, sir. Watch the show." Then I turned my back on the man I'd served coffee to for 18 months and walked toward the elevator bank. The chime rang out, a cheerful, artificial sound that felt like a death sentence. I reached up and pulled the pins from my hair. My braids fell loose, heavy and free against my shoulders. The careful attendant dissolved. The fail-safe emerged. Before you see what happens next, drop a comment. Have you ever hidden who you really are? I want to know. The elevator doors burst open like a mouth spitting violence into polished silence. 6 men, tactical gear, no insignias. Weapons raised. They moved with the precision of expensive training, fanning out, checking corners, fingers resting on triggers with the casual intimacy of men who killed for a living. The leader stepped forward. Caucasian, buzz cut, a scar running from his temple to his jaw like a question mark written in scar tissue. His eyes swept the penthouse and landed on me. A black woman in a cleaning uniform, standing alone in the center of a $40 million war room. He lowered his weapon slightly. Not enough to be careless. Just enough to be dismissive. "Where is he, girl?" The word dripped with contempt so casual it might have been habit. His team spread out behind him, checking the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. Professional. Thorough. They'd done this before. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked slowly toward my cleaning cart, the battered, wheeled contraption I'd pushed through these halls for 18 months. My movements were deliberate, unhurried, like I was simply reaching for a fresh bottle of disinfectant. The leader's eyes tracked me, but he didn't raise his weapon. Why would he? I was just the help. Collateral damage at worst. A witness to eliminate after they finished the real work. "I asked you a question." His voice sharpened, a blade testing resistance. I smiled. Not at him, at the camera lens embedded in the crown molding above the obsidian desk, the one feeding directly into the panic room's monitor array. "Don't blink, Chairman. You're about to see why I was the only one allowed in your inner sanctum." My hand closed around the pressurized canister of industrial degreaser. My other hand gripped the heavy-duty floor scraper, 2 pounds of tempered steel with an edge honed sharp from months of stripping lacquer off hardwood. "He's not here," I said softly. The leader's jaw tightened. He raised his weapon again, center mass, textbook stance. "Then you're useless." "Maybe." I triggered the degreaser. The chemical jet hit him directly in the eyes, a concentrated stream of petroleum distillates and alkaline compounds designed to strip industrial adhesive. His scream was immediate, raw, the sound of a man whose corneas were dissolving. I was already moving. The floor scraper came up in a brutal arc, catching the second man under the jaw as he turned toward the sound. The impact shattered bone. He dropped like a puppet with severed strings. If you're not subscribed, you'll miss how this ends. Don't get caught unprepared. 2 down. 4 remaining. They were professionals, but I'd spent 18 months mapping this space. I knew every sightline, every angle, every piece of furniture that could provide cover or become a weapon. I dove behind the obsidian desk as gunfire shredded the air where I'd been standing. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, sharp cracks that punched holes in the floor-to-ceiling windows. Safety glass spiderwebbed but held. 3 men advanced, weapons raised, flanking positions. The 4th hung back, covering the elevator. Smart. Disciplined. I didn't have a gun. Guns were loud, messy, required permits and paperwork and left forensic evidence. Ji-Hoon's former head of security had trained me differently. "You're the ghost in the machine," he'd said during those midnight sessions in the subterranean firing range. "You use what's there. You become the environment." I grabbed the marble pen holder from Ji-Hoon's desk, 8 pounds of solid Carrara marble shaped like a minimalist sculpture. I waited for the footsteps to close within 6 feet. Then I stood and threw. It caught the third man in the throat. The sound was wet, final. He went down clawing at his crushed windpipe. The fourth and fifth men opened fire. I rolled left, feeling the heat of bullets passing inches from my shoulder. My hand found the charging cable for Ji-Hoon's tablet, 6 feet of braided steel core wire. I came up behind the leather couch, wrapped the cable around my fists, and waited. The fourth man rounded the corner. I looped the cable around his neck and pulled. His hands scrabbled at the wire, at my arms, at anything. I held on. 10 seconds. 15. His struggles weakened, then stopped. 4 down. 2 remaining. The fifth man was smarter. He didn't charge. He fired methodically, suppressing, forcing me to stay behind cover while he repositioned. But he'd forgotten about the windows. The safety glass had been compromised by earlier gunfire. I grabbed a crystal decanter from the bar cart, probably worth more than my annual salary, and hurled it at the nearest window. The glass exploded outward. Wind howled into the penthouse, 43 stories of empty air just beyond the shattered frame. The fifth man's eyes flicked toward the sound. That half-second of distraction was all I needed. I was across the room before he could reacquire his target. The floor scraper found his wrist. Bones snapped. His weapon clattered away. I didn't give him time to recover. My elbow found his temple. Once. Twice. He collapsed. 5 down. 1 remaining. The leader had recovered enough to see through the chemical burn. His face was a ruin of tears and rage, but he still had his weapon, still had training, still had the desperate fury of a man who'd underestimated his opponent. He raised the gun. Our eyes met. And in that moment, I knew, one of us wouldn't leave this room alive. The leader's finger tightened on the trigger. I threw myself sideways as the bullet carved through the space where my chest had been. The round punched into the wall behind me, embedding itself in the hand-painted silk wallpaper that probably cost more than most people's cars. Time fractured into fragments. Breath. Movement. The mathematical certainty of angles and velocity. He was good. Better than the others. His follow-up shots tracked my movement with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. I felt one graze my shoulder, a line of fire that told me I was bleeding but not how badly. I couldn't think about that now. Behind the panic room's steel door, Chairman Ji-Hoon was watching. Every camera in this penthouse fed directly into his monitors. He could see everything. The bodies. The blood. The woman he'd known as his quiet, obedient attendant moving through violence like it was choreography she'd performed her entire life. What was he thinking? Was he shocked? Horrified? Impressed? Did he finally understand why his former head of security had insisted on hiring me despite his initial protests? She's overqualified for cleaning, Ji-Hoon had argued during my interview, which I'd later learned about from hacked security footage. Her references are too perfect. Something's wrong. Exactly, the head of security had replied. When everyone else is dead, you'll want her. The old man had been right. He just never imagined he'd be among the dead when that moment came. I rolled behind the kitchen island, European marble, waterfall edges, probably imported at criminal expense. The leader's bullets chewed through the cabinetry, sending splinters of custom woodwork into the air. My shoulder throbbed. The chemical burn of adrenaline was the only thing keeping the pain at bay. I pressed my hand against the wound. Blood, but not arterial. I could work with that. You're just delaying it, the leader called out, his voice rough from the chemical burn. I'd done permanent damage to his eyes, he'd be half blind for life if he survived the next 3 minutes. He hired you to clean his floors, and you think that makes you special? You think that makes you worthy? There it was. The contempt. The assumption that because I'd worn a uniform and carried a mop, I couldn't possibly be dangerous. People saw what they expected to see. A black woman in service. Harmless. Ignorable. Safe. I'd built my entire career on that blindness. You talk too much, I called back, buying time, calculating angles. The kitchen had 3 exits. He was covering 2. The third led to the wine cellar, a dead end unless you knew about the service tunnel. Which I did. Which he didn't. Ji-Hoon's going to die in that box, the leader continued. Sealed room. No ventilation override. We've got the building locked down. He's got maybe 18 hours of air. Then he suffocates. Alone. Afraid. And it'll be your fault for locking him in there. The words were designed to destabilize me, to make me second-guess my decision. Psychological warfare 101. But he'd made a critical mistake. He'd told me they'd compromised the panic room's ventilation. Which meant Ji-Hoon was in danger. Not from bullets, but from time. If I didn't end this fast, the man I'd spent 18 months protecting would die anyway. Drop a comment if you'd risk everything for someone who never knew your real name. What would you do? My eyes landed on the gas range. Commercial grade. 6 burners. Connected to a high-pressure natural gas line. An idea crystallized, brutal, efficient, irreversible. You're right about one thing, I called out. I'm just the help. I grabbed the fire extinguisher mounted beneath the sink, 20 pounds of pressurized CO2, and hurled it toward the living room. It crashed through the already damaged window, disappearing into the Seoul night. The leader's attention snapped toward the sound. Exactly as I'd planned. I twisted all 6 burner knobs to maximum and smashed the ignition system with the nearest heavy object, a cast iron skillet that probably cost more than my first car. Gas hissed into the room, invisible and deadly. Then I ran. The service tunnel entrance was hidden behind the wine cellar's back wall, a narrow maintenance corridor that connected to the building's central ventilation system. I'd memorized every inch during my 3rd week of employment, when everyone assumed I was just taking inventory of cleaning supplies. Behind me, the leader realized too late what I'd done. I heard his boots pounding across marble, heard his sharp intake of breath as he registered the smell of gas. He fired blindly in my direction. The muzzle flash was bright enough to paint shadows across the walls. Bright enough to ignite the gas. The explosion was a physical force, a wall of heat and pressure that picked me up and threw me into the wine cellar's steel door. My head cracked against metal. Stars burst across my vision. Sound became muffled, distant, like I was underwater. The world tilted sideways. Blood, mine or his or someone else's, dripped into my eye. I forced myself to move. Forced my hands to find the tunnel latch. Forced my legs to drag me forward into darkness. Behind me, the penthouse burned. The sprinkler system kicked in, but it was too late. The explosion had shredded the suppression lines. Water mixed with fire, creating steam that turned the air into a sauna. I crawled through the tunnel, every movement agony. My shoulder screamed. My head pounded. My lungs burned from smoke inhalation. But I was alive. I was alive, and Ji-Hoon was sealed behind steel, watching his empire burn, watching the woman he'd never truly seen save his life at the cost of everything he'd built. The tunnel ended at a maintenance access panel. I kicked it open and tumbled into a secondary corridor, concrete floors, fluorescent lights, the unglamorous skeleton of the luxury building. I leaned against the wall, gasping, trying to orient myself. The panic room was 3 floors down, accessible only through biometric locks and override codes. I had maybe 10 minutes before Ji-Hoon's air supply became critical. 10 minutes to bypass security, open the panic room, and prove that I hadn't just saved his life, I'd earned the right to be seen as more than just the help. 10 minutes to show him that the woman who'd served his coffee had always been the most dangerous person in the room. I pushed myself upright. Pain radiated through every nerve, but I'd felt worse. I'd survived worse. And I'd be damned if I let Chairman Ji-Hoon suffocate in a steel box after everything I'd just done. I started moving toward the emergency stairwell, leaving bloody footprints on pristine concrete. The ghost light was still flickering somewhere above me. But ghosts, I'd learned long ago, were just the living wearing different faces. And I was very good at wearing faces. The emergency stairwell smelled like rust and forgotten maintenance requests. Every step down sent fresh waves of pain through my shoulder, but I couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. Ji-Hoon had 18 hours of air. Maybe less if the explosion had compromised the panic room seals. I'd memorized the building's security architecture during my first month. The panic room's biometric locks were triple redundant, retinal scan, fingerprint, and voice authentication. All keyed to Ji-Hoon and the head of security. The head of security who was 6 months dead. But I'd prepared for this. In my cleaning cart, currently scattered across a burning penthouse, I'd kept a mobile bypass kit hidden in the false bottom. Military-grade hardware designed to crack biometric systems. Which was now ash. Think, I muttered, my voice echoing in the stairwell. Blood dripped from my fingertips, leaving a trail. Think. The panic room had one weakness. Every secure system did. The designers had built in a manual override for catastrophic failures, a physical keyhole hidden behind the biometric panel. Old school. Analog. Impossible to hack because it required an actual key. A key that Ji-Hoon kept in his desk drawer. In the penthouse. That was currently on fire. I stopped mid-step. My reflection stared back at me from the stairwell's metal handrail, blood-streaked, exhausted, determined. Then I remembered. 18 months ago, during a late-night cleaning session, I'd watched Ji-Hoon open that drawer. He'd been drunk, a rare vulnerability, mourning the anniversary of something he never spoke about. He'd pulled out the key, stared at it for nearly an hour, then tucked it back. But not before I'd photographed it with my contact lens camera and had a duplicate made at a black market locksmith in Itaewon. The duplicate I kept on a chain around my neck, disguised as a cheap religious pendant. I reached beneath my uniform collar. The key was still there, warm from my body heat. Thank God for paranoia. I resumed my descent, moving faster now. 3 floors. 2. 1. The panic room's entrance was in a sub-basement corridor that officially didn't exist on building schematics. Reinforced concrete walls. LED strips providing cold, clinical light. The air tasted recycled. The biometric panel glowed softly beside the seamless steel door. I ignored it and pried off the decorative cover plate with my floor scraper's edge. Behind it, a keyhole, exactly where I knew it would be. I inserted the key. It turned with a precise, mechanical click. The locks disengaged, a sequence of heavy thuds as bolts retracted. The door hissed open, releasing a pressurized breath of stale air. Inside, Chairman Ji-Hoon stood in the center of the panic room, surrounded by monitor screens still displaying feeds from the burning penthouse. His face was illuminated by the flickering light of flames captured in high definition. He'd watched everything. Every kill. Every calculated move. Every moment I transformed from his invisible attendant into something else entirely. Our eyes met. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was dense, loaded with 18 months of carefully maintained deception. You were supposed to join me, he finally said. His voice was steady, but I heard the tremor underneath. When you sealed the door. You were supposed to come inside. You would have been in the way. His jaw tightened. 6 men. You killed 6 trained operatives with cleaning supplies and, he gestured at the monitors, at the footage of destruction. Chemistry. Industrial degreaser. Gas line manipulation. Basic physics. I leaned against the doorframe, my shoulder throbbing. Nothing special. Who are you? The question I'd known was coming. The question that would reshape everything between us. I could lie. Give him a comfortable fiction. Maintain some version of the dynamic we'd established. Or I could tell him the truth. Your head of security hired me, I said. 3 years before you met me. He knew someone would eventually breach your inner circle. So he planted me. Deep cover. The one person you'd never suspect because I was black. Female. Service class. His voice was flat, processing. Invisible. Yes. Only subscribers see how this story ends. Don't miss the truth that changes everything. Ji-Hoon stepped closer. In the monitor light, I could see the calculations running behind his eyes. He was the king of the silent sea, a man who'd built an empire on reading people, on leveraging weakness, on staying 3 moves ahead. You saved my life, he said slowly. That was my job. Your job was to clean floors. No. My job was to be the fail-safe. I met his gaze directly, no submission, no performance. My job was to be the person you never saw coming. And when everyone else was dead, to be the one still standing. He was close enough now that I could smell the expensive cologne he wore, mixed with the sweat of fear he'd never admit to feeling. "Show me your shoulder," he said quietly. "It's fine. Show me." I pulled back my uniform collar. The bullet graze was ugly, a furrow of torn flesh still bleeding sluggishly. Not life-threatening, but it needed attention. Ji-Hoon's fingers were steady as he examined the wound, clinical despite the intimacy of the gesture. "You need stitches. I need to get you out of this building. They compromised the ventilation. You have maybe 12 hours of air left. Then we have time." He reached up, and for a shocking moment, I thought he might touch my face. Instead, he pulled a first aid kit from the panic room supply cabinet. "Sit. Sir." "That's not a request." For the first time in 18 months, I obeyed. Ji-Hoon's hands were surprisingly gentle as he cleaned the wound. We sat in the panic room's sterile light, surrounded by monitors showing the smoldering remains of his penthouse, and he stitched my shoulder with the steady precision of someone who'd done field medicine before. "You'll scar," he said, cutting the surgical thread. "I have others." His eyes flicked to mine, a question forming. "Mogadishu. Caracas. Moscow." I rolled my shoulder experimentally, testing the stitches. "This one's actually pretty small. You're not just security. You're a specialist." Was. Past tense. I stood, checking the monitors. The building's fire suppression had finally contained the blaze, but the penthouse was a total loss. I retired. Took this job because your former head of security offered me something I'd never had before. What? Stability. A place to stop running. An identity that wasn't attached to a body count. I turned to face him. He promised me 3 years. Play the role, stay invisible, and if nothing happened, I could walk away clean. And if something did happen, then I'd earn my retirement by keeping you alive. I gestured at the monitors. Job complete. Contract fulfilled. Ji-Hoon was silent for a long moment, processing. The king of the silent sea, reduced to sitting in a concrete box while his empire burned above him, reassessing everything he thought he knew about control. "The men who came for me," he said finally. "Who sent them? Does it matter? You have enemies. Plural. They'll send others. Then I need. You need to disappear." I cut him off, my voice firm. "Your penthouse is destroyed. Your security is dead. Your location is compromised. Right now, you're vulnerable in ways you haven't been since you started building your empire." His jaw tightened. I could see him resisting, the instinct to fight, to reclaim control through force and money and reputation. But he was smart enough to know I was right. "Where would I go?" he asked quietly. "I have a safe house. Off-grid. No digital footprint. Stocked for long-term habitation." I pulled out my phone, miraculously undamaged, and showed him coordinates. 3 hours outside Seoul. "We leave now, you might survive the week." "And you? You said your contract is complete." "It is. So you're just going to walk away?" After, he gestured at the monitors, at the evidence of what I'd done. "After this?" I should have said yes. Should have taken my out, collected whatever payment the head of security had arranged, and disappeared into the next identity, the next country, the next comfortable lie. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Ji-Hoon had stitched my shoulder without hesitation. Maybe it was the 18 months of coffee and careful conversation, the strange intimacy of knowing someone while they didn't know you. Maybe it was just exhaustion and blood loss making me sentimental. I could stay, I heard myself say. Temporarily. Until you're secure. Why? Good question. One I wasn't sure I had a clean answer for. Because you didn't panic, I said finally. When I grabbed you, when I shoved you in here, you didn't fight me. You trusted me, even though you had no reason to. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. You could have resisted. Could have demanded explanations. Could have pulled rank. I met his eyes. But you didn't. You let me do my job. Ji-Hoon stood, closing the distance between us until we were barely a foot apart. This close, I could see the exhaustion lining his face, the reality of mortality settling into a man who'd spent years pretending he was beyond such human concerns. "What's your real name?" he asked softly. I considered lying. Considered maintaining the boundary between who I'd been and who I'd pretended to be. Instead, I told him the truth. His expression shifted, recognition, surprise, something else I couldn't quite name. "I've heard that name before," he said. 3 years ago. Caracas operation. The diplomat who disappeared. He didn't disappear. He was extracted. By you. By me. A slow smile spread across Ji-Hoon's face, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him in 18 months. "You're considerably more expensive than I was paying you. You were getting a discount." He laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was unexpected, almost shocking in its authenticity. "Come work for me," he said. "Not as cleaning staff. As what you actually are. I told you. I'm retired. No one retires from what we do. We just find better reasons to keep doing it." He extended his hand, formal despite the blood and smoke and destruction surrounding us. "Partner. Equal stake. Help me rebuild what I've lost, and I'll give you something you've never had." "What's that?" "A home. A real one. Where you don't have to pretend to be someone else." I looked at his outstretched hand, at the calluses that matched my own, at the steady certainty in his eyes. 18 months ago, I'd walked into this building wearing a lie. I'd cleaned floors and poured coffee and made myself invisible, waiting for the moment when everything would go wrong. That moment had come and gone. The contract was complete. But maybe the story wasn't over. I took his hand. His grip was firm, honest, the handshake of equals who'd seen each other at their worst and most vulnerable. "Partners," I agreed. "But I'm keeping my cleaning cart. You never know when you'll need industrial degreaser." Ji-Hoon smiled. "Deal." We walked out of the panic room together, no longer boss and attendant, no longer king and ghost, but two people who'd survived the same fire and chosen to face whatever came next as allies. The emergency lights flickered overhead as we climbed the stairs, leaving the smoke and ash behind. Above us, Seoul's neon skyline waited, indifferent and beautiful. And somewhere in that sprawling city, new enemies were already plotting, new threats emerging. But for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't facing them alone. Comment below, would you have stayed or walked away? Tell me what you would do, I read every single one.